The woods. I have been an avid horsewoman my entire life. The barn I grew up riding at was in a rural area and situated on a few hundred acres of undeveloped land. I spent a lot of time out in those woods, and so a whole lot of nature happened out there. It's as close to perfect solitude as you are going to get in western New York. In my late teens, I had a horse who was a pretty great guy, but I had to put him up for sale as I felt I was ready for a more challenging animal and could not afford two horses. One lazy summer morning, I packed a lunch and headed out for a long, meandering ride in the woods. I wasn't feeling terribly ambitious that day and intended to head to a man-made pond I knew near one of the borders to have lunch and read for a bit before heading back. About halfway there, I decided to take an alternate route that led along a pretty tree-lined ridge and turned off the main trail. I have no idea what happened when I turned into that cutoff, but the woods we walked into were not my woods. They weren't creepy or weird or wrong, but they were different. I was immediately disoriented. Nothing looked familiar, and I couldn't pick out any landmarks or trails. I was weirded out enough that I turned around to go back to the main trail, but the trail back was just gone. I couldn't have been more than 30 yards from the main trail, but for the life of me, I couldn't find it or any way back to it. We traveled back that direction for far longer than we'd been walking in, and I finally gave up and just gave my horse control of the aircraft, figuring he'd find his way toward home eventually. He immediately took a hard left, which should have been taking us parallel to the main trail and in the general direction of home. And 10-ish minutes later, we walked us into a clearing. It was a meadow with a perfect serene pond in the middle. The meadow was short, tidy grass, like it had been mowed recently. But there were no obvious routes for any sort of mower to get in or out. The pond was weirdly clear. Most of the water in the area was very swampy, but this was clean and fresh smelling. The wildflowers around were not any I'd seen before. I assumed it was some farmer's personal zen place and didn't think too much of it. I hopped off, let my body loose to graze, ate my lunch, read for a bit, and enjoyed a gorgeous afternoon sitting there, watching the dragonflies and frogs, and spending time with my horse, generally feeling peaceful and content. It was really a storybook setting, and I remember thinking how weird it was that no one from the barn had ever mentioned this incredibly beautiful place that was so close to home. I packed back up a couple of hours later and remounted, then headed back the way we'd come in. As we left the clearing and went back into the woods, I immediately felt at home again, and I found the main trail right where my internal compass said it should be. It didn't make much sense to me that the main trail was still that distance back when we had traveled what felt like a mile in that direction. But I honestly thought I'd just been daydreaming and meandered off course. When I turned around, we got back to the barn with no issue, and I headed home that night feeling very grateful to have had such a wonderful, peaceful afternoon with my friend, knowing that he was going to a new home soon. The next day, I mentioned the meadow and pond to the barn owner, and she looked a little confused. Her family has been there for generations, and she told me she didn't recall any such area anywhere near the barn, nor did she recall anyone else mentioning such a place. I told her she had to see it, and we tacked up and headed out. Couldn't find it. Not that day and never since. The owner shrugged me off, but it's been 6 hours out there somewhere. And the freaking place wasn't more than 30 yards from the main trail and near a well-used cutoff to another well-used trail. I made it my mission to find it and spent the next 2 weeks scouring the area. In the 20 years since, I have never been able to locate it. I have pored over satellite images of the area. Nothing. So far as I can tell, it doesn't exist. When we turned off the main trail that day, we went somewhere else. After a couple of weeks, my horse perished suddenly. A day after literally saving my life while we were out on the trail looking for that freaking impossible meadow. No joke. I have no explanation for that meadow. But I don't think I get to go back there. I know how ridiculous this sounds, but I honestly think it was his place, and he was sharing it with me before he left for good. I am not the sort of woman prone to that sort of flight of fancy, but I know what I saw and what I felt, and I know the place doesn't freaking exist out there anymore. Story written by Redditor, Today's Trash, as originally published on Reddit and Ranker, entitled "The Woods We Walked Into Were Not My Woods." Hey everyone, this is Kida Emina. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned next Monday for another story. If you have any scary stories that you want to share or hear narrated, email me at kidaemina@gmail.com. I'll see you in the next episode. Big hugs everyone. Bye!